Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the history, the execution, and the incredibly complex legacy of the 1989 U.S. invasion of Panama. We're talking about the largest and most complex American combat operation since the Vietnam War, literally deploying tens of thousands of troops in the blink of an eye, all to depose a foreign leader. So we have to start with a wild paradox that really sets the stage for our entire explainer. How exactly does Manuel Noriega go from being a highly paid CIA informant to the primary target of a massive American military strike? It's this insane shift from Cold War cooperation straight into open hostility. And honestly, it set the whole template for modern U.S. military interventions post-Cold War, so understanding this is absolutely crucial. To make sense of this whole shebang, we've broken it down into 5 quick acts: an uneasy alliance, the breaking point, Operation Just Cause, the Vatican Embassy siege, and finally, a controversial legacy. Let's get right into it. Act 1. An uneasy alliance. Well, before he was public enemy number 1, Manuel Noriega was actually on the CIA payroll for over a decade. He was raking in up to $200,000 a year just to help push back against Soviet influence in Central America. But here's the catch. He was playing both sides of the fence. He had this highly unstable dual role. On one hand, he's working with the DEA, and at the exact same time, he's taking cash from drug cartels and laundering their money. Talk about a risky game, right? Relations eventually took a massive nosedive. Back in 1977, the U.S. signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaties, promising to hand back the Panama Canal by the year 2000. But by the late 80s, things were completely falling apart. In 1988, U.S. grand juries actually indicted Noriega on drug charges. Then, in May of 1989, the pot just boiled over. An opposition candidate, Guillermo Endara, wins the Panamanian presidential election by a massive 3-1 margin. Noriega's response? He literally just annuls the results, and Endara gets beaten up in the street the very next day. Noriega was holding onto power by sheer brute force. Which brings us to Act 2, the breaking point, in December 1989. The actual breaking point hit in mid-December. On December 15th, Panama's General Assembly passes a resolution declaring a state of war with the United States. The very next night, a powder keg goes off. 4 unarmed U.S. military personnel are just driving to dinner. They hit a Panamanian Defense Forces roadblock, and the PDS opens fire. They fatally wounded Marine First Lieutenant Robert Paz. And right nearby, in a completely separate incident, a Navy SEAL and his wife, who saw the shooting, were detained. He was severely beaten, and she was threatened with assault. It was total chaos. So Washington had to respond. President George H.W. Bush laid out 4 very specific objectives to justify military action. He said the U.S. needed to safeguard the roughly 35,000 American citizens living in Panama, defend democracy after those rigged elections, combat the drug trafficking that Noriega was tied up in, and protect the Torrijos-Carter treaties. The U.S. argued that treaty gave them the right to intervene to protect the canal, and that became the official rationale on record. Act 3. Operation Just Cause. 27,000. I really want that number to sink in, because that is the total number of U.S. troops deployed for this invasion. To put that into perspective, the Panamanian Defense Force only had about 16,000 members total, and frankly, only about 4,000 of them were actually trained and combat ready. It was a strategy of sheer overwhelming force, hitting 24 targets all at once. What's really wild is that Operation Just Cause was actually the combat debut for some of the most iconic military tech we know today. We're talking the absolute first time the AH-64 Apache helicopter, the F-117A Nighthawk stealth jet, and the Humvees saw real action. The Nighthawks were actually dropping massive bombs on PDF barracks, and the strikes were incredibly cinematic. Take Operation Acid Gambit, for example. Delta Force operators literally landed these heavily armed MH-6 Little Bird helicopters right on the roof of the notorious Carcel Modelo prison. Their goal? Rescuing Kurt Muse, an American civilian who'd been convicted of espionage and was being held hostage by Noriega's regime. Against all odds, this crazy rooftop rescue was a complete success. At the exact same time, you had Operation Nifty Package. U.S. Navy SEALs snuck into the airport and the harbor to completely destroy Noriega's private jet and sink his gunboat, the Presidente Porras. Basically, they were slamming the door shut. They cut off every avenue of escape, essentially trapping the dictator inside Panama and forcing him to go underground. But look, we have to talk about the cost, because all that immense firepower triggered an absolute tragedy. The assault to capture the central headquarters of the Panamanian military, La Comandancia, sparked these massive fires, and those fires spread incredibly fast, just devastating the neighboring working-class area of El Chorrillo. In the blink of an eye, our story shifts from a swift tactical victory to a profound human disaster. Act 4. The Vatican Embassy Siege. So Noriega realizes he's the target of this huge manhunt, complete with a $1 million bounty on his head. What does he do? He runs to the Vatican Embassy in Panama City for asylum. Now, U.S. troops obviously can't just legally storm a diplomatic mission, so they switch to psychological warfare, and it gets totally surreal. They set up these massive concert speakers outside the compound and just blasted heavy rock music. We're talking AC/DC and Guns N' Roses 24/7. The Pentagon later tried to say it was just to block parabolic microphones from listening to negotiations, but come on, the absurdity and the psychological pressure of that situation was undeniable. It was an intense standoff. Noriega went into the embassy on Christmas Eve. After 10 grueling days of deafening heavy metal and being totally surrounded, he finally surrendered on January 3, 1990. They immediately threw him on a military transport plane to face trial in the U.S. And by the end of January, Operation Just Cause was officially wrapped up. Act 5. A controversial legacy. Now, the aftermath of this invasion is incredibly polarizing, and you can see that just by looking at the death toll. The official U.S. military count claimed 202 Panamanian civilians died. But if you look at independent human rights groups, the UN, or former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, they put the civilian death toll drastically higher, anywhere from 300 to up to 3,000 people. That's a massive gap, and the true human cost remains fiercely debated today. And behind those disputed casualties is another staggering number. 20,000. That is the estimated number of Panamanians who were suddenly displaced, turned into refugees overnight, because their neighborhoods, especially El Chorrillo, were just leveled in the crossfire. Entire communities literally erased. You know, the international community was absolutely furious. The UN General Assembly voted 75-20 to condemn the whole invasion as a flagrant violation of international law. The OAS and the European Parliament backed that up too. But here's the crazy part. Back in the US, the invasion had an 80% approval rating. And a CBS poll even found that 92% of Panamanian adults supported getting rid of Noriega. So on the ground, people wanted him out. But diplomatically, it was wildly slammed as illegal aggression. Years later, this haunting graffiti was found on a weathered memorial in the ruins of El Chorrillo. It just says, "Aquí pasó algo." Something happened here. It's one of those things that pulls you right out of the macro-level geopolitics and grounds you back in the very real human reality of the Panamanian people. Military operations end, but the scars they leave on the local populations, those are permanently etched into their history. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Operation Just Cause definitely removed a corrupt dictator, and it completely reshaped the post-Cold War world. It firmly set a precedent for future interventions. But when you look at the civilian cost and the massive international backlash, we really have to ask ourselves, where exactly do we draw the line between justifiable intervention and unilateral aggression? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this complex chapter of history with me.